In 24,000 BC, a hunter in the Sungir settlement of modern Russia was buried in a tunic stitched with thousands of ivory beads. It took an estimated thousands of hours just to carve those beads from mammoth tusks, long before agriculture or metal tools even existed. He did not set out to invent high fashion. He was solving the brutal, unforgiving math of a deadly Ice Age winter. What nobody knew at the time was that this desperate need to stay warm would trigger a technological leap that mapped human DNA. It would push our species across 6 continents, build trade networks spanning thousands of miles, and separate us from every other living creature. Because the story of early clothing is not just a question about animal hides, it is a story about needles and invisible parasites. The technological leap that began in freezing places like this would change everything. Sungir, Russia, roughly 24,000 BC. For millions of years, our earliest ancestors survived exactly like other primates on the planet, relying entirely on their own thick body hair. But as early human species began walking upright and hunting on the open savanna, a heavy coat of fur became a biological trap. Running in the midday sun generated massive body heat. If they could not sweat to cool down, they would rapidly collapse and die. So over generations, human ancestors traded their thick fur for millions of sweat glands and bare skin, perfectly adapted for the blazing heat. It was a brilliant evolutionary trade-off for endurance hunting, allowing humans to outrun prey over long distances without fatally overheating their large brains. But that incredible advantage came with a devastating catch. When the sun went down, or when they migrated north, they were brutally exposed. They were now the only creatures on Earth fundamentally unsuited for cold weather, wearing a thin skin that leaked heat into the air. A sudden drop in temperature rapidly pulls heat directly out of unprotected bodies, triggering violent shivering and dangerous drops in core blood pressure. If core temperature falls far enough, severe hypothermia sets in. The heart slows, deep confusion takes over, and organs quietly begin to shut down. They desperately needed a synthetic survival layer. The obvious solution was to simply borrow the thick fur they had just finished evolving away from. But wrapping a freshly killed animal around your shoulders came with a horrifying set of problems that threatened to kill you anyway. A raw, freshly skinned animal hide is mostly water, fat, and protein. If you wear it immediately, it acts exactly like raw meat. It begins to rot against your skin. Within days, the hide turns into a decaying trap that breeds dangerous bacteria and attracts insects. This is where the story takes a turn nobody sees coming, because stopping that rot required a gruesome leap of raw human ingenuity. Even if it did not rot, as the moisture evaporates, an untreated skin violently shrinks and dries into an inflexible, heavily rigid board. In freezing temperatures, it is even deadlier. The water trapped inside the raw hide turns to ice, freezing the heavy blanket totally solid. To survive the approaching winters, early humans had to figure out how to stop the natural, inevitable process of biological decay in leather. They had to invent the brutal science of leather tanning, and the earliest methods required an immense amount of pure, physical human pain. By some accounts, the most basic form of softening a hide involves scraping away the fat and vigorously chewing the tough, raw leather. Women and men would spend hours continuously chewing thick skins, breaking down the tough fibers with their own teeth, just to create a blanket. Later, they discovered that soaking the skins in a gruesome mixture of animal brains and urine could chemically preserve the hides from rotting. The brain tissue provided essential oils that thoroughly coated the leather fibers, keeping the skin soft and pliable even in the bitterest winter cold. That sounds like a perfect, finalized solution. It was not, because a loose leather blanket still left massive gaps for the freezing wind. A draped skin cannot trap body heat efficiently. If the temperature drops below zero, a loose cape lets the crucial, warm air easily escape. To survive the deep cold, humans needed clothing that hugged their limbs, sealing the warm air directly against their highly vulnerable, hairless skin. And the tool that made this possible was not a massive weapon or a roaring fire. It was a tiny sliver of carved bone. If it had stopped there, this would be a very different story. But that tiny sliver of bone decided who lived and who died. Historians suggest this exact design flaw might be one quiet reason why Neanderthals eventually went extinct during the harshest peaks of the Ice Age. Neanderthals were physically stronger and better adapted to cold than modern humans. But archaeological evidence shows they likely only wore loose, draped animal capes. Without tightly fitted garments to seal in their body heat, even their robust biology could not withstand the plunging temperatures of the freezing tundra. Meanwhile, our smaller, physically weaker human ancestors survived those exact same conditions, not because they were tougher, but because of a tiny technological leap. Archaeologists have discovered sewing needles carved from animal bone dating back roughly 40,000 years, complete with tiny drilled eyes for threading sinew. This invention changed everything. The bone needle allowed humans to stitch tightly tailored garments, securely connecting sleeves to bodies to completely block the wind. They could fashion fitted hoods that protected the neck and head, locking in the crucial microclimate of heat generated by their own bodies. With tailored clothing, human beings were no longer physically trapped in warm climates. They could confidently walk into the frozen tundra and survive. This simple technology allowed our ancestors to cross the frozen Bering Land Bridge, spreading human populations into the Americas and conquering the globe. But determining exactly when humans first started wearing tightly fitted clothes proved nearly impossible, because animal hides quickly rot away in the ancient dirt. To find the exact timeline, scientists had to look at something much more disturbing than fossilized bones or ancient cave paintings of hunters. The answer was hiding in our parasites. Humans are unique because they uniquely host two distinct types of lice: head lice and body lice. Head lice cling strictly to human hair, but body lice evolve specialized claws designed specifically to grab onto the dense fibers of tailored clothing. Body lice cannot survive directly on bare human skin. They live and lay their eggs entirely inside the dark, warm seams of shirts. By examining DNA, geneticists estimate that body lice split from head lice roughly 170,000 years ago, adapting to woven clothes. This genetic split acts as a biological clock, proving that humans were wearing complex, stitched clothing long before they boldly migrated out of Africa. We solved the freezing problem so effectively that we invited a brand new parasite to live intimately against our skin for thousands of generations. But once clothing became a permanent part of human life, it rapidly evolved from a raw survival tool into something far more mechanically sophisticated. In 1991, hikers in the Italian Alps stumbled across the frozen, mummified body of a man who died roughly 5,000 years ago. Known as Ötzi the Iceman, his frozen body offered a perfectly preserved look at exactly what a prehistoric traveler wore to survive the mountains. He was not wearing a simple fur sack. His outfit was a complex, multi-layered survival suit engineered for maximum heat retention and daily mobility. Ötzi wore a heavy coat stitched from alternating stripes of goat and sheepskin, tailored precisely to fit his body and block the wind. His leggings were made from thick goat hide, securely held up by suspenders, and a woven grass cape rested on his shoulders, repelling rain. His shoes were a survival masterpiece. They featured thick bearskin soles for grip, deer hide uppers, and soft grass stuffed inside as thermal insulation. Ötzi's wardrobe proved that prehistoric humans were expert tailors who fully understood the lethal physics of cold weather and exactly how to defeat it. But relying on dead animals had a severe limit. To truly clothe a growing civilization, humans would have to harvest the earth itself. Animal herds migrate constantly. Relying solely on hunting for your winter coat was a dangerous gamble if the herds did not return on time. As humans settled into agricultural farming, they desperately needed clothing that was lighter, more breathable in summer, and easier to reliably mass-produce locally. The next massive leap happened when they figured out how to extract thin, fragile fibers from tough native plants like wild flax and hemp. By some accounts, early weavers discovered that soaking flax stalks in stagnant water allowed the outer bark to rot, leaving only soft inner fibers. These tiny plant fibers were incredibly weak alone, but if twisted together under high tension, they locked into a surprisingly strong and durable thread. This invention was spinning. It revolutionized human existence, but it came at a staggering, almost unimaginable cost in daily, exhausting physical human labor. To make a single woven tunic, a person had to spin miles of continuous thread by hand using a simple, heavy, wooden drop spindle. A drop spindle is a weighted stick. You twist the fiber, drop it, and let the rapid spinning motion pull the raw thread perfectly tight. It takes roughly 7 hours of constant, repetitive hand spinning just to produce enough thin thread to weave one single square yard of plain cloth. Historians estimate that making a single ancient Roman toga required hundreds of hours of manual labor, from shearing sheep to the final heavy weave. For centuries, women spent nearly every waking moment spinning thread. They spun while walking, while watching children, and by the faint evening hearthlight. The sheer volume of time required made clothing one of the most valuable, fiercely protected items a person could own in the ancient world. That sounds like progress. It was, but the insane labor debt turned simple fabrics into dangerous weapons of social class and absolute power. Once humans mastered weaving, clothing stopped being just about survival. It quickly became the ultimate visual weapon for asserting social dominance and raw authority. And nothing showed power more than color. In the ancient Mediterranean, the most fiercely guarded status symbol was a specific shade called Tyrian purple. This brilliant color did not come from a plant. It was painstakingly extracted from the rotting glands of thousands of predatory marine sea snails. By some accounts, it took roughly 10,000 crushed sea snails to produce enough dye to color just the trim of a single garment. The extraction process provided leaving vats of snail glands to bake in the hot sun, creating a stench so putrid it sickened entire neighborhoods. The dye was remarkably vibrant, never faded in the sun, and cost far more than its exact weight in solid gold on the ancient market. Wearing purple was strictly legally restricted. In ancient Rome, anyone outside the imperial family caught wearing a fully purple cloak could face immediate execution. Even with expensive dyes, for most of early history, clothing remained relatively loose. Tunics were tied with belts or pinned at the shoulder with brooches. Tightly tailored fashion as we know it today was impossible until the 13th century, when an unknown inventor completely revolutionized how garments were fastened. They invented the simple buttonhole. Before this, buttons were just decorative metal discs sewn onto fabric as jewelry, serving absolutely no practical mechanical function. By cutting a reinforced slit into the fabric, clothing could finally be pulled tightly against the body and securely locked in place without tearing. This tiny mechanical innovation gave birth to modern tailoring. Sleeves became tight, jackets hugged the torso, and the era of form-fitting fashion violently exploded. But underneath the new tailored fits, the fundamental economic reality had not changed. A simple shirt was still a massive investment of human hours. Today, a basic shirt is a cheap afterthought. Before the Industrial Revolution, clothing was a major financial asset that people guarded with their lives. Working-class families in medieval Europe often owned only 1 or 2 outfits for their entire lives, patching and repairing them until they finally disintegrated. A heavy woolen cloak was so valuable that it was regularly written into legal wills, passed down carefully from parents to their surviving children. Thieves rarely broke into peasant houses just to steal gold. A primary target for a midnight robbery was often a pile of good, woven shirts. In many towns, a worn garment was never discarded. Good fabric was painstakingly cut down to make children's clothes or basic household cleaning rags. Buying a new outfit purely to change your personal style was an unimaginable luxury reserved only for the most extremely privileged, wealthy elite. Clothing meant raw survival, and survival meant endless, exhausting work. That was the baseline reality for thousands of years of recorded human history. But human ingenuity was about to solve the crushing labor problem, and the solution would change the physical landscape of the entire planet forever. The breaking point came in the late 18th century. The global demand for cloth was so high that hand spinners simply could not keep up. Inventors in Britain built massive water-powered spinning frames, machines that could spin hundreds of threads simultaneously without a single wooden drop spindle in sight. These clattering machines gave birth to the modern factory system, pulling workers out of their quiet homes and into crowded, deafening brick textile mills. It was an industrial miracle. A single machine could produce more thread in one day than 20 skilled women could spin in a grueling week. But that miracle demanded an endless supply of raw material. To feed the hungry British mills, an ocean away, a dark system rapidly expanded. The explosion of cheap textile manufacturing became deeply intertwined with the massive expansion of cotton plantations in the American South, fueled by enslaved labor. The relentless drive for cheaper clothing helped cement a brutal economic engine that would eventually tear the United States apart in a bloody civil war. The garment you wore was no longer simple stitched skin. It was the product of a massive, globalized, and often deadly industrial supply chain. That brings us directly to the modern era, where the original, desperate purpose of clothing has been buried under mountains of cheap, fast fashion. We buy shirts for a few dollars, wear them twice, and discard them without thinking about the vast resources woven into their synthetic threads. We open a closet stuffed with 100 perfectly tailored garments, complain that we have nothing to wear, and grab a jacket without looking. We have forgotten what it means to be a fragile, hairless ape standing absolutely defenseless against a sudden drop in the bitter winter wind. But every stitch in that fabric carries the deep echo of a 40,000-year-old survival strategy that kept our ancestors from freezing in the dark. The technology changed. The desperate need for warmth didn't. The only difference is that we entirely forgot what that freezing vulnerability felt like. If uncovering the hidden history of everyday survival keeps you hooked, take a single second to hit subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Drop a comment below telling us which forgotten invention you want us to investigate next. And share this video with someone who loves history. Because the modern world is built on thousands of strange, forgotten survival secrets. And we are truly just getting started. See you next time.